Good afternoon, and welcome to Boom Without Bust. My name is Jeff Zender, CEO of Zender Communications, and we're proud to sponsor today's session for two reasons. First, as a member of the board at CPEX, I've had the privilege to witness firsthand the amazing planning work that CPEX and the entire staff does throughout Louisiana with programs like Louisiana Speaks, the Coastal Best Practices Manual, and the Smart Growth Summits you're enjoying this week. I'd also be remiss if I didn't encourage each of you to consider joining CPEX today. Second, as the founder of Zender Communications, a strategic planning and communications firm headquartered in New Orleans and with offices in Baton Rouge and Nashville, I'm particularly interested in seeing Louisiana take advantage of this boom opportunity we have in front of us to attract more talent and wonderful businesses to our great state. Today's panel will discuss how we can maximize this unprecedented $100 billion plus economic development project opportunity, or projects, I should say, slated in Louisiana over the next few years. They'll discuss how smart planning and policy can help ensure that future generations benefit from this wave of prosperity. So let me introduce the panel members today. First, Ms. Denise Bodie, a principal with Cornerstone Governmental Affairs. Denise is a nationally recognized expert on tax and energy policy and will lead today's session. Next is Ms. Elizabeth Boo Thomas, President and CEO of CPEX. Boo will present the role that planning can play in getting our communities ready for this boom period. Mr. Dan Bourne is President of the Louisiana Chemical Association, and Dan will expand on these economic development opportunities that are coming to Louisiana and what this means for our communities. Ms. Susie Showen, Workforce Initiatives Manager for LED's Fast Start program, and she'll discuss the workforce and training needs that are also coming our way. And lastly, we're honored to have the Honorable Vicki Steiner, a North Dakota State Representative and the Executive Director of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. And Representative Steiner will talk about the experiences and lessons that have already been learned in North Dakota. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel, and I'll turn over the reins to Ms. Denise Bodie.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad that you're all here, and I think you've got a pretty exciting session that's going to play out over the next hour and a half. So hopefully you'll think of questions and write them down because I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions stimulated by the discussion that we're going to have. As the slide talks about, we're here to talk about boom without bust. And many years ago, I know we had the last boom we had in the oil industry, there are a number of these bumper stickers that sprouted up all over the place that said, "Please, Lord, send another oil boom, and this time I won't blow it." Well, that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we can do an effective job at the beginning of this wonderful new resource expansion that we have in the United States, and particularly in this region and in the oil and gas producing regions throughout the country, how we can learn and put in place good planning practices. You know, the U.S. oil picture has changed dramatically since the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s, with production up to almost 8 million barrels a day, up from just 5 million 5 years ago. You know, high global prices have the U.S. reducing consumption of petroleum products. Imports have dropped over that same period from almost 10 million barrels per day 5 years ago, close to 6.9 million barrels per day right now. And by the year 2019, we're expected to only import 34% of the oil needed to be utilized in the U.S. So in essence, we will be up almost to 66% independent again. This cycle of booms in the oil and gas sector has repeated itself numerous times in the last century, both here in the U.S. as around the world. This session will introduce the topic of how to manage the resource boom through smart growth planning to capture long-term prosperity. Here are the top production areas today, experiencing all the pains of rapid growth but cognizant of the fact that all fields are finite, or just maybe just one more oily than gassy dependent on prices for development. In a recent Associated Press article, a hotel operator in the center of the Fayetteville Shale, that's in Arkansas, and it's not up here anymore, not even on the chart, made more than $1 million in 2009 providing housing for the energy industry. And now, just 5 years later, he makes less than half that amount. No wonder. 60 drilling rigs were running then. Now they're only 11. Here's the breakdown of our oil supplies and our gas supplies today. A dramatic change from just 10 years ago, with the onshore shale gas formations taking market share from the offshore gas production. In the case of the oil and gas boom, gas-rich areas like the Arkansas Shale are being abandoned because the U.S. natural gas prices have dropped to less than 4 million cubic feet MCF. The industry has moved off to more oil-rich as opposed to gas-rich shale formations like the Marcellus along the East Coast, where there's a world oil market price and oil is selling for around $100 a barrel. Or they're moving to the Bakken shale, which is very oily with higher prices being able to be gotten. In fact, in the case of the Bakken shale that Vicki's going to be talking about later, the natural gas is so plentiful and cheap it is flared so the oil can be produced. With the constraints imposed by lack of sufficient transportation infrastructure to move all the oil and gas being produced, they have unique planning issues. The Bakken, in fact, just crossed the 1 million barrel a day mark, which is pretty amazing in this day and time when less than 5 years ago, we were all planning for the dramatic decline of oil, and we talked about the end of all the oil production and that we needed to get off oil. So just imagine how we would be talking about this 5 years ago. But like every boom in American history, this is the story. During boom periods, times are great, but as production becomes plentiful, prices drop, so industry investment drops, and the industry moves to greener pastures. On the introductory slide, I showed you the bumper sticker that came out in the oil patch after the last bust and said, you know, that please just give us another chance, in essence. And being an oil patch brat myself, what wasn't announced is I'm actually from Oklahoma, if you can't tell from my accent, where I'm an oil patch brat on both sides of the family. My dad worked for Phillips. I regulated oil and natural gas as a statewide elected official for 10 years during the, from 1997 to 2007, was the president of the Independent Petroleum Association of America, the first female president for over 10 years as well. So I have kind of an industry background. And so I know what that means, but let me tell you a little bit about what I didn't really understand, hadn't really put together until recently. For those of you who've really studied this phenomenon, the boom and the bust, the possession of oil, natural gas, or other natural resources does not necessarily confer economic success. In fact, when you look around the globe, there are many resource-rich countries, yet their people continue to experience low per capita income and quality of life. Meanwhile, other countries have experienced Western-level standards with virtually no natural resources. This is characterized as the natural resource curse. So how do we avoid the natural resource curse as we possess the benefits of the latest shale oil and natural gas boom? First, don't ever believe the boom will last forever. Making money hand over fist 1 year, really, and then preparing to deal with the downturn without resources is not fun. Yet that seems to happen over and over. Here's a recent projection on the production from the fields I showed you in one of the first slides, found in the Energy Information Administration, DOE's think tank, their 2013 Energy Outlook. As you can see, it looks like these top oil shale producing regions will peak somewhere in the year 2020. And although they don't decline rapidly like some of the other traditional vertical well and conventional fields, they start going down. So this is our timeline. This is what we have to be thinking about in terms of a timeline for planning so that at the downturn and when we have less revenues, we have put in place a plan to take advantage to diversify our resource base. So in the U.S., ever since the Arab oil embargo in the 1970s, Congress has banned oil exports. I don't know if you know that, except to Canada and Mexico. At the same time, this new oil production is heavy in natural gas liquids and it's light sweet crude, the new production we're talking about from shale. So our refineries, our U.S. refineries, have been converted from refining sweet crude, as they used to refine, to refining sour crude. So we have a problem and we have an opportunity. So do we figure out a way to start exporting some of this crude we can't use in our refineries? We don't have the time, really, in the short term to convert all these refineries. How do we deal with the natural gas liquids? So this is really the opportunity. Here is the great opportunity for utilization of these natural gas liquids being produced for not only downstream chemical and refinery boom, but also a renaissance in American manufacturing from cheaper energy. With this region, the center of the downstream energy marketplace, you have tremendous opportunities for jobs and growth. Planning should not only occur in the boom towns where drilling is occurring, but also downstream where expanded facilities are needed to refine and process the product. That's what the panel is here to talk about. Now, this is really interesting because this is natural gas liquid growth projections. As you can see, the U.S. production is increasing fairly dramatically. So this is going to be the opportunity here in this region. And here are some of the 14 new facilities being built to take advantage of this boom. These are just some that the Energy Information Administration has identified as new facilities in this region. And you can see an amazing new capacity, need for construction for new facilities, jobs, highly skilled technical training jobs. These are long-term, 20-plus year facilities. And I think this is really important. Since oil cannot be exported, industry refines what it can here into refined product, which can be exported. Now, I remember I told you oil can't be, but refined product can. And if you will take just a look at this chart, it shows you that it's almost doubled in terms of exports of refined petroleum products. And gas exports will soon exceed imports as well, with the plentiful resources available today for the time when they may not be there. Looking around the U.S. and the world, those folks blessed with resource abundance that grew sustainable economies use the resources and revenues to upgrade their infrastructure to diversify the economic base. Those companies, those countries, and those areas that prospered just didn't sell their resources. They industrialized, they diversified their economy in a way that could sustain long-term economic viability. That would be smart energy development. There are plenty of people who have begun talking about that kind of planning, and that's what we're here today. In the producing areas, organizations have been formed like the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Counties. In South Texas, the South Texas Energy and Economic Roundtable, or STEER. We're blessed in addition, though, to the local team here that's going to talk about opportunities in planning led by Boo. We're blessed also to have Vicki Steiner, who will talk about what is going on in these new production areas, the shale regions in the Bakken in North Dakota, and they're an example of really being thoughtful about how to do it right. With a cooperative effort between communities and the industry, I believe this time we won't blow it. But enough for me. Let's hear from our distinguished panel. Boo?
While he's doing that, I just, again, want to thank our panel. Denise has worked so hard to make this thing very professional and informative and educational, and I just appreciate her and all of our panelists. Thank you. Someone in an earlier session talked about my favorite definition of insanity, and that is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we have a chance this time to do something differently, and I hope that the lessons we learned after Katrina and Rita, Gustav Ike, Isaac, and no telling what else, is that we know that Louisiana is full of unique places. And the Louisiana Speaks process told us, from the 27,000 people that were involved in this, is that we want to preserve the communities that we already have, the uniqueness that is ours, that sets us apart from other states. Our quirkiness, our Cajunness, our New Orleans cool, whatever, but we want to preserve that. And so in doing that, we also found in actually polling those 27,000 is that for the first time in our property rights states, our citizens said, you know, it's more important to build in places where we already have development and build more there rather than continuing to build outward. We also learned that the way we were building, the way we were developing, was not very smart, and it got blown away or it got flooded. And so those are the decisions that we've been trying to make and adhere to. In other words, recover, as Louisiana Speaks Regional Plan said, recover sustainably, grow smarter, and think regionally. And through the Louisiana Speaks process, and remember this was for the 35 southern parishes that were most affected by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and this regional plan actually looked at not only land use and transportation and economic development, but also coastal protection, restoration, and resilience all at the same time. And so we saw a real culture shift in how Louisianians were thinking about our land. And we formed lots of public-private partnerships. We've heard a little bit about that yesterday, but we found that they are the secret to what we need to do in Louisiana. Prior to Katrina, we only had 14 parishes that had any sort of a plan at all. I wouldn't even call most of them comprehensive plans. And today we have over 40 that do have comprehensive plans. So we've seen a real change in what we've been doing, because remember, Katrina and Rita really exposed, as my good friend Brace Godfrey used to say, exposed the underbelly of Louisiana and the things that we had neglected and let go. And so we do have a new day in Louisiana looking at planning in a whole new way. One of the great lessons I think we learned is that we don't like FEMA trailer parks. That's not the way to go, right? What our consultants developed was a pretty neat model of Katrina cottages, and these used to be available at Lowe's. For the small one, about $17,000 in materials, or the large one, $35,000. That didn't count all the other things, i.e. like land and foundations and stuff like that. But they really are a lovely way to rebuild quickly and efficiently, and using existing infrastructure are bringing infrastructure in properly. This is a lovely village in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, and these are rental units that rent today for $600 to $1,100 each, and so depending on the size. This is really the way we should be going. This is the way we should be planning. What we have coming is a different kind of impact, not a disaster from engineering or from weather, but instead one of the biggest economic booms in Louisiana ever. We're looking at I heard a prediction that we'll have 68,000 new jobs in Louisiana in the next 2 years. In the next 2 years. And another economic analyst said, if we just predicted $5 billion in projects over the next decade, $5 billion over the next decade, that would be earth-shattering for Louisiana. The last I heard, and Dan will probably tell us, it was 75 billion. And so what we know is we better get ready. We have thousands of new workers coming, and where are they going to live? Where are they going to get their McDonald's? Where are they going to get their healthy foods? So this could be Lake Charles, Louisiana. This is actually the main street in Watford City, North Dakota. And this is the kind of boom that they're having. Vicki will correct this in a minute. But most communities, according to statistics, can handle an increase in growth of up to 5% a year, 5 to 6% a year. But what are the challenges of this new growth for all the parishes, the 6 parishes surrounding the Lake Charles area? And not to mention the area between here and New Orleans. Most communities have to deal with this rapid growth, and they're going to have to look at this new industry, and the associated taxes may be outside of any jurisdiction that receives the growth, and there'll be no money to improve services. The preferences of the newcomers will be considered rather than the old-timers, not that any of us are old-timers, but, and they also are being forced out. Lack of jurisdiction of land use and siting of industries, already said. Difficult to assimilate the influx of newcomers. It's difficult to predict future service needs. We heard, if you want to prepare pizza in little town in North Dakota, you could make up to $18 an hour. Sounds pretty good to me, or to my kids, I guess. But you'll have an increased risk and an increased cost of just basic goods and services. What's your mama going to have to pay for a loaf of bread? I don't know. But then, you know, we already have roadways that are challenged. What kind of infrastructure do we need to be planning for right now today? We were working in West Felicia Parish, and there was actually a development like this. This is West Feliciana, where there was going to be a typical commercial development, big old parking lot, visible from the highways, and this is a certain number of residential units. And this was going to be approved. And what we found in doing the plan there is West Feliciana said they wanted to preserve their rural character of life. Well, if you have one like this, it's only going to spawn more and more. We suggested that they do a much more condensed form of development that would, same number of units, same number of commercial square footage, but it is a much smarter way to build. But does this parish, does this community want to put in place the land controls that are necessary to do that? That's the big question. So today, it's no longer about incentives to get new businesses to come. It's about providing the quality of life for their incredibly smart and talented workers. And to provide that quality of life that will not only attract but keep residents in the future. And there's no question that Louisiana will gain from this boom. I think the question is how much, and will it be lasting? And I think we want everyone to benefit. If you're a senior citizen and you are on a fixed income and all of a sudden it does cost more to buy a loaf of bread or to buy any service, how are you going to stay in that community? How are you going to stay in that community? So that's the real question, and we know what good planning does. Look at downtown Baton Rouge. We've been following this plan for the last 15 years. We've seen $2 billion of investment in downtown because we had a plan to stay with. We also know that when you have a plan in place, you will be able to handle any disaster better. You'll be more resilient. You'll come back. So do these communities that are getting ready to have this boom, do they have time to plan? Well, if you fail to plan, you're going to plan to fail. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I borrowed your Renaissance there. Hope you don't mind. It's great to be on a panel with all my colleagues, but especially with Boo Thomas, Many years ago, when I served on a board called the General Health Board, we had a particularly visionary leader named Tom Sawyer, who was the CEO of our companies. And it was Tom's vision that we should start something in the mid-city to help save that area. And we did, and Boo came along to run that in its infancy, and has gone on now to, of course, do many great things. Boo, as always, terrific. We are encountering over the next 5 to 7 years one of the great tsunamis of investment that has been enjoyed by America, not just Louisiana, not just South Louisiana, but the country itself, because any way you figure it, we're in for $50 to $70 billion worth of investment, most of it south of I-10. And with that's going to come a lot of challenges, of course. I think one of the things that's important for us to understand today is why we're here in the base case and why it's coming this way. Our history in this industry goes back early in the 1900s, when in 1901, oil was discovered in, guess where, Jennings, Louisiana, Jeff Davis Parish. If you haven't gotten a ticket going through Jeff Davis Parish on I-10, just wait long enough and you probably will. That's where it all began. Natural gas came along a little later than that, up in North Louisiana. But in 1909, Standard Oil built its refinery here. And from that point on, infrastructure began to evolve with pipelines and railroads and barges and those types of things. And we had a great period of growth from 1901 until World War II. In World War II, we really took a leap forward because it was greatly because of what happened in Baton Rouge and in Lake Charles and other parts up and down the river that America was able to respond to its challenge in World War II. Tetraethyl lead, high-octane gasoline, synthetic rubber, oils and greases that went into the Higgins boats. The history books are full of that. And in that one period from 1941 to 1945, the state really grew in terms of manufacturing. Then that wartime economy was shifted into a manufacturing economy for an industrial age that followed World War II. Somebody said, why was there a baby boom? It was very simple. The soldiers came home, pent-up demand. But what happened was that we transformed a wartime manufacturing economy. There were some fits and starts into an economy that became the envy of the whole world. And that helped Louisiana as well, because in that post-war period up to the 1990s, we had some governors in this state who were very, very interested in economic development, John McKithen being one, who, through his leadership, the state passed the right to profit laws back in the 1960s with the encouragement of Senator Russell Long to help bring foreign investment into America. And we got plants from Europe and we got plants from the Far East, up and down the river and in Lake Charles. Then we went through a period of decline when natural gas prices became too expensive for many of our plants to operate. We'll talk briefly about that in a second. And now, because of the miracle of shale gas, an economic model has literally been turned on its head. And instead of shrinking now, we are growing, and we will continue to grow. Quick slide. That is what a megasite looks like. That is a megasite from just north of Baton Rouge to the bottom of the river. That's what we have on both sides of the river now along the Mississippi, which is one of God's great gifts to us, the aorta of American commerce, the Mississippi River. But we also have another megasite in Lake Charles, in Calcasieu Parish, right on the banks of the Sabine River, just before you get to Texas. About a third of all of our investment is there in Calcasieu Parish. And the investment that's coming to Louisiana is going to be concentrated in that parish and in the parishes from just north of Baton Rouge to the mouth of the river. And here's why. We use natural gas like a bakery shop uses flour. If you go to Gambino's or Ambrosia's and you look at all of the shelves, you're going to find regular bread, you're going to find wheat bread, you're going to find king cakes, French bread, donuts, bagels. You get the point. Bakery shop uses flour for just about everything. And a chemical plant uses natural gas for a lot of different things. We generate heat with it. We boil and steam water so that we can get additional pressure and heat for our processes. We use it to generate power, literally generate electricity with natural gas. And we use it for something called feedstock. That is the daily bread of the chemical industry, feedstock. And from that feedstock, from natural gas, comes all of these downstream products that become all of those downstream products. And so with that paradigm, we have now a raw material that, because of shale gas, has become much less expensive and a lot more available. And that is what's driving this renaissance. That's what's incenting Methanex to dismantle 2 plants in Chile and to put those plants on ships and bring them to Geismar to reconstruct them to make methanol, another building block. Now, this is not an Energy Information Administration slide. This is a slide prepared by a fellow by the name of Randall Peterson, who is a chemical industry historian here in Louisiana, lives here in Baton Rouge. He updates this about every 20 minutes because that's how often these announcements are coming down. And so we have all of these announced investments from Mobile all the way to Corpus. You can see the impact of this. It's not just Louisiana. It's the whole Gulf Coast. And here's why. Oil and gas are rated on a BTU value, on an energy value. And when oil is nominally at $100 a barrel and gas is nominally at $4 an MMBTU, that's a 25-to-1 ratio. Oil to natural gas, BTU, or energy value. Anytime natural gas and oil in a ratio of at least 7-to-1, meaning anytime oil on an energy value is 7 times more expensive than gas, the Gulf Coast can knock the socks off of virtually every other manufacturing economy in the world, especially if that economy is in any way tethered to oil for its daily bread. We compete now with Europeans who use oil and crack it to get naphtha, to get its basic building block, and we use natural gas. And so when oil is at 100 and natural gas is at 4, we can import into Europe cheaper than the Europeans can make it itself. So that is the opportunity that we have here in Louisiana. And with those opportunities come significant challenges. And you're going to hear a little bit about that in the next presentation with Susie. They're talking about the incredible opportunity we have, but the challenge we have with respect to labor, to build these plants and to sustain them and to operate them for the next 30 to 40 years. One other thing, shale gas is everywhere around the world. And as Denise pointed out, none of this lasts forever, but one thing that can interdict this is if other countries and other economies decide they want to start mining shale like we're mining shale gas. And the Europeans are debating it right now. And every time my wife and I go to Europe, we find the nearest shale gas protest and we line up and we say, you know, shale, no, you don't want this. Worst thing that ever happened. But the Europeans have particular issues because of geography, because of, EU issues. I don't know if they'll ever get it together. If they do, they will become worthy competitors of ours. And so even if there are $70 billion, announced, 40 billion of that will probably get built. The other 30 billion, for economic reasons, might not. But even that poses a tremendous opportunity for us. One final note about planning. I was in a pool hall in Thibodaux many, many years ago. I was a kid. And there was a local pool shark. A fella came in from Donaldsonville. He had never been to Thibodaux for the pool hall before, and he showed up and he challenged the pool shark to a game of pool. So they put $5 on the table, and the pool shark, in order to be deferential to the visitor, said, "Why don't you go ahead and break the rack?" So the fella took the cue ball and he broke the rack, and 4 striped balls went into the opposite pockets of that pool table. And the fellow who ran the pool hall looked at the pool shark and said, "If he planned that, you're in trouble. If we don't plan this, we will be in trouble." Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So as Dan just explained, I'm here to talk about workforce. I'm Susie Showen, and I work with the Department of Economic Development. And I just want to emphasize that particular thing very quickly, that I work for the Department of Economic Development, but I focus on workforce. I think that helps to illustrate just how profoundly workforce is, or how profoundly important workforce is to the economic growth potential of this state. And I want to talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm going to start off, though, with just a few numbers here. The number of jobs in Louisiana has already reached a historic high. We just hit 2 million folks employed. Probably several of you have heard that number before. We're looking at enormous growth in several different industries. Industrial construction and manufacturing, I would like to emphasize, are very much connected in the conversation that we're about to have. The industrial construction boom that we're about to see is fueled in large part by the low natural gas prices produced by the shale gas boom and so forth. But what we're really talking about here in Louisiana is not so much the extraction side of it, but the manufacturing side of the boom. And I really do want to emphasize that as we go forward. We're looking at industrial construction employment projected to grow by about 20%, and we already have a lot of these folks in the state. This is an enormous number of people that we're talking about. And we're looking at manufacturing employment, another large employer in our state, to grow by about 14.5%. So this is going to make a major difference to the employment mix that we're looking at here in Louisiana. We're looking at the biggest manufacturing expansion on record. The Greater Baton Rouge Industry Alliance, GBRIA, compiles a number of projects announced in the state, not just in the Greater Baton Rouge area. I want to emphasize that. They compile these projects throughout the state. And we're going to look at a few of those projects that comprise that absolutely enormous number of $83.8 billion. So you heard earlier about the impact that $5 billion could have on our state. According to the GBRIA numbers, we're looking at quite a bit more than that. The workers that we're going to require are going to be in the industrial construction fields, and those are the folks who are going to build the plants, the projects that we're talking about. They're going to build those facilities. But after those facilities are built, we need to staff them. That's a lot of people. And a lot of those folks are going to be the same people that were employed in the construction industry. A lot of those craft skills transfer over, and in fact, many of the folks who are working in the plants are still employed by the construction contractors. So what we're going to see is that we're going to need a lot of those folks to stay in our state and remain employed in our state in order to fully capitalize on the opportunity that we have in front of us. There's a lot of discussion about construction jobs as highly cyclical and requiring a lot of mobility around the nation or even the globe. What we're looking at here is folks that we're going to need to build these plants, and then we're going to need a lot of them to stay and maintain those plants. I really, really think that's an incredibly important part of the conversation that we need to have. Between now and 2020, and we're going to look in more detail at some of these numbers, we're going to need to produce about 130,000 new people to enter the construction industry. I'm not talking about 130,000 new jobs. I think everybody would realize that that's unrealistic. But this is a fairly high attrition industry, and we're going to need to pay attention to the fact that we need to replace workers due to attrition. And there are a lot of retirements out of this industry as well. So we want to make sure that we're framing the conversation appropriately and recognizing who we're going to need to train to fill jobs produced as a result of attrition, as well as those that are truly new jobs. We're going to need craft workers, certainly, and that's a lot of the conversation that I know people have around the state in terms of the need for construction workers. But they're not just craft workers. It's the entire construction industry. And they employ a lot of engineers, a lot of management, a lot of financial managers. We're going to need a lot of finance and accounting people. And we're going to need a lot of support staff as well, many of whom require a great deal of educational preparation in order to take these positions. We're not just talking about more welders. We're definitely talking about more welders. We need a lot more welders, but we need a lot more folks in other fields as well. About 86,000 of that 130,000, though, are craft workers. So we're going to need folks such as welders, electricians, machinists, carpenters, masons, those traditional craft jobs that are really very, very highly in demand in the state already, and we're expecting to see that increase dramatically. And then the remaining 36%, again, are folks like engineers, management, and support staff. We've seen some maps of the projects that we're talking about, and I like numbers, and I wanted to put up a few numbers. So I hope I'm not losing everybody by doing this, but I just want to show the magnitude of some of these projects that we're talking about coming to Louisiana right here. Again, earlier we heard about the impact that $5 billion could have on our state, and I want you to look at how many of these projects are individually over $5 billion in investment. And I also want to illustrate the fact, and we don't have all of our cells filled out here, but peak construction demand, those are some very large numbers. But if you look at the number of people that are going to be required to maintain these plants, those are very large numbers as well. So we're really talking about permanent jobs here and long-term growth and the workforce that's going to be required to sustain that and capitalize on that opportunity. Speaking specifically of industrial construction, we're not looking at a sharp peak and then a dramatic fall off. That's another sort of misconception, I think, that people often intuitively expect to see in the construction industry, is that we're going to have something like a post-Katrina boom where we've got a big spike and then a big fall off. That's not what we're projecting to see here. What we're projecting to see is long-term sustained growth with a then gentle fall-off as we're seeing some of our projects get built and convert over to the maintenance side. I should emphasize that we're just looking at construction demand here. So when I said earlier that we're going to need folks to staff and maintain these plants, that is not built into this projection that I'm showing you right here. So this is just the demand for construction workers. I think we can reasonably expect that we're going to have more projects announced in the future. So what was on that list that I just showed you before is not the sum total of what we're going to expect. So that gentle decline that you start to see here in later years may actually be filled in by later projects that we bring in that are going to start their construction cycle further down the line. So this isn't something that's going to be, again, a sudden spike and then a decline in demand. We're really expecting quite a lot of sustained growth and sustained demand. And that presents us with a challenge and, of course, an opportunity. But this is a challenge. There's no two ways about it. We need to radically expand our workforce. We already have a very large industrial construction workforce in the state. Our number of craft workers is estimated to be at least 70,000 strong. Honestly, it's a fairly difficult number to pin down exactly, but that's a good approximation of it. We have many major construction contractors that call Louisiana home. This is an advantage for us because we've got the experts, we've got the training experts here in Louisiana. It also means that the supervisory positions and the project managers and so forth are people who will be expected to be residents of Louisiana. So again, an opportunity for long-term career potential for the folks that we're offering these jobs to. We have a number of industrial construction training providers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some action that the state is taking on my next slide. But right now, I just want to talk about where these craft training programs typically happen. And again, we're specifically talking about craft training right now. We do have quite a number of these programs at the high school level, and we need quite a lot more. We really need to encourage a lot of our high school students to come out of high school with a very solid preparation in skilled labor. And that's the Department of Education. The Louisiana Community and Technical College System is a really integral part of this preparation program. The Associated Builders and Contractors of Louisiana, the ABC schools, do an absolutely excellent job of working with industry to prepare students for jobs and to take folks that are already working in the industry and advance their skills. Our unions train quite a lot of people. They've got a very extensive apprenticeship program. We also have a number of local construction user councils, and I'm just going to call out the council, and Lake Charles is doing a particularly effective job here. They work very, very hard on solving this problem. And then a number of proprietary schools also play a role here. What I really want to make sure is part of the ongoing discussion of meeting our workforce needs, and this is not just in the construction field, but overall, is that we need to have a very responsive workforce in order to be able to capitalize on these opportunities that come to Louisiana. So right now, we need a whole lot of construction workers. We're gonna need a whole lot of manufacturing workers to staff those plants that the construction workers are building. And then we need engineers and financial managers. We need teachers. We need healthcare workers. We need everybody in the state to support this boom. And we need as many folks in the workforce as possible. And that means we need really flexible, convenient training programs so that folks can go through a welding program, become a welder, advance through the ranks, go to school, get their construction management degree, come back, take a leadership role, advance their opportunities as an individual, improve the conditions for their families, for their children, for their communities. And all of that is really determined by their ability to access training that's flexible, responsive to the needs of industry, responsive to our changing economic conditions. And that is going to allow our companies and us as the Economic Development Department, as we work to expand jobs within Louisiana, to ensure folks that will have workforce availability, but it also maximizes the employment opportunities, the opportunities for building personal wealth, the opportunities for our communities as they grow. I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the solutions that we're talking about. Louisiana has a very collaborative effort underway to address these workforce challenges. We have been very aggressive. We are widely recognized as being organized at the state level to address these issues. As part of the Louisiana Workforce Investment Council, which is a government-mandated council comprised of industry, organized labor, and government entities, it convenes to advise the Louisiana Workforce Commission and other workforce entities on their mission. They have created a dedicated craft training task force, which produced a very detailed report. They have now formed themselves into a steering committee that is driving forward a number of initiatives identified in this report. Their report and their future plans are all available at the Louisiana Workforce Commission website. And there are 4 subcommittees within the steering committee that focus on particular pieces of the overall challenge. Training, there's a subcommittee that focuses specifically on the high schools, on recruitment, which includes recruitment of instructors, which is a gigantic issue for us, and as well as recruitment of students, and then retention in the industry. I had talked earlier a little bit about the relatively high attrition rates in some of these industries, and we really do need to get a handle on that. We have our craft training programs in all of the organizational levels that I talked about earlier, expanding their capacity so that we can meet the needs of our future construction projects as well as the ones that have been announced now. There's a large amount of public funding that has been dedicated to this. The Workforce Training Rapid Response Fund is a fund that was created by the legislature a few years ago to respond to exactly this sort of situation, to dramatic expanding workforce needs. The Carl Perkins funding, we've got a lot of regional planning around that to direct those funds appropriately to these demands. There is discussion of committing additional funding if possible, and then the capital investment plans through LCTCS are now reaching about $300 million in investment designed to expand their capacity. But really, the message that I would like to finish up on is that stakeholders at the state are committed to a regular and ongoing review of workforce demands, to targeted alignment of resources, and to producing innovative, responsive solutions. And to sort of tie this back to the larger conversation that we're having now, I've been focused very much on workforce, but this commitment to addressing the challenges confronting the state in a very strategic and focused way extends to all issues of the smart growth question. This is the one that I wanted to focus on, but I don't want to end on that note. I want to end on the idea that we've got a lot more to focus on as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind invitation. My husband texted me a picture about a half hour ago, and it was lightly snowing back home in North Dakota, so I'm enjoying your wonderful Louisiana weather today. First, some pictures of the location of North Dakota, in case you're not as familiar with it as I am. As you can see, this is actually a slide that shows the refining capacity in the United States, and you are blessed with much infrastructure. North Dakota has one Tesoro refinery in Mandan, North Dakota. We do have 3 new refineries underway, and 2 of them, one is on the Indian Reservation, and the other 2 are going to be topping facilities which will produce diesel. And that's one of the things that we have had in short supply between our agricultural community uses a lot of diesel and the industry's been using a lot of diesel. Prior to the North Dakota Bakken oil boom, it's not a gas boom at this point, our Bakken oil boom, we're a rural pasture area in western North Dakota, semi-arid, not a lot of water, ranching, small cities. In fact, a large city in my area is 20,000 people, so very rural. This shows you the 4 Bakken counties. And I think it's pretty interesting that the 4 Bakken counties now produce more oil than the state of Alaska. We took number 2 in the nation in March 2012, and I actually had this intense hope that we would surpass Texas, but now Texas is going to stay number 1, which I guess happens quite a bit. But anyway, I was hoping that we were going to be number 1. As you look at that map, what this is showing you is the intensity of the potential. And if you look there, of the 4 counties, McKenzie County, and I don't know if this is McKenzie County is right here, and that's where the sweet spot, if you will, or that's where in North Dakota, that's where most of the rigs are going to be drilling. And right here is that picture that was shown earlier of all that traffic is in Watford City. I live here down in Dickinson and Stark County. 70% of the people working up in Dunn County drive every day on Highway 22, or they take Highway 85 up to Watford City and work. There's another city called Williston here, and there's a city called Minot here. Those are called the 3 hub cities, and our state has recognized that hub cities need a little extra help because they are supporting the workforce that goes out every day to make North Dakota number 2 in the nation in production. And so that's what that slide is trying to show you. Watford City is now calling itself the epicenter, and truly they are. By December of 2014, we expect that just North Dakota will be producing 1 million barrels per day. Back in 2000, we were about 80,000 barrels. So we've had a very rapid rise in oil production over the last few years. This here is a typical Bakken oil rig. We consider it a business center. Some of those of you are in economic development. We have 185 of these little business centers working every day. The oil industry's created not quite, but almost about $2 billion a month in North Dakota over the last few years. It's really been significant economic activity for us. We're told it's a 30-year play. We'll eventually go to gas about around 2035, 40, somewhere in there, they're saying. It takes 23 days to complete this well on average, and there's a $20 million profit over the 20 years. To date, the Bakken has created, these are some statistics, I won't go through all of them, but the Bakken has created a net of 90,000 jobs. 70,000 will be long-term. The oil people who work for us in western North Dakota are willing to drive 2 hours. We have homes selling in South Dakota and obviously in Montana, but people in Bismarck, North Dakota, which is in the center part of the state, are seeing oil field housing being used, and then the workers are very willing to drive for that type of job, but they really like to bring their families up if they can. Recycling of water will be the next huge new deal because we have 2,000 wells per year that will need 22 million gallons of water. So the recycling effort that the industry is doing is really much appreciated. A typical well, a Bakken well, will drop its production will be depleted by 60% the first year, 30% the second year, and 10% the third year, and the rest of its life. So it falls off fairly quickly. We don't have as many pipelines in place, and we've got some landowner issues right now. It's a rural area, and the pipeline guys are getting tough times getting easements because there's multiple pipeline easements being sought, both intra-field and then the larger pipelines trying to get the product out of market. And we have trouble moving oil both in and out of our state at this time. And when the activity started, they told us that rail would never work because Burlington Northern would never bring their rates down to be competitive. That isn't what happened. And in fact, this is an old slide. I think the number is closer to 73% of our oil is moving by rail. Burlington Northern is very similar to what I see with the oil industry, a very efficient money machine. And if there is money to be made, they are willing to work with whatever industry they can. And the oil industry itself is very efficient. We had a lot of chaos in the beginning where they were trying to establish their leaseholds, because once they get the oil well drilling in that lease, they've got the life of that well to come back and add the other wells to it. And so there was a little bit of chaos as they established that first well, driving all over, everything was crazy. But after it was established, I would say maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, year and a half ago probably, you could see more of an efficient march across as they developed it, and they knew they didn't have to hurry anymore, and so there was a little bit more organization that's taking place today. We do have thousands of trucks on the road. Truckers earn $80,000 to $120,000 a year now in North Dakota, and some of them are from the South because I see a lot of Louisiana license plates. A lot of the oil workers who have come in to help us develop this play were from Idaho and Utah. Of course, we get some Minnesota, some South Dakota, some of the region, but we've got the drillers and people who are experts in oil and gas tend to come from Texas, Louisiana, from the South, and we do have quite a few truckers from Alabama, Louisiana as well. So we see the license plates. Most of our highways, we have 2 major highways going north and south in this area, and they are under construction. As you can see, this is what they're doing is they'll take a 2-lane and then they try to do 3 lanes and then they try to do 4 lanes and try and get it built out to handle the activity. Environmental issues, we do have flared gas, and I can tell you as a legislator, it's a concern. It's a concern to the state. We want to see that captured, obviously. The industry actually started something voluntarily about 6 months ago or so, I believe it was, where they looked at the flaring. If 27% of gas is being flared, how could we bring that number down? And they've looked at the wells that are producing the most activity to do that 27%. So they're trying to get the bulk of that under control. And ONEOK announced yesterday in North Dakota that they're putting in a $390 million processing plant to considerably reduce the flaring, and they're targeting certain wells that are flaring extremely high, so that the industry is really trying to work with us. We also had, someone mentioned in our question and answer session about earlier about spills and how the industry is taking care of things. And we've been fortunate. Our industry really works with our governor's office. If there's an issue on pipeline safety, they get in there and they form task force, and they really seem to want to address the issue on. Safety is a big issue. They have meetings all the time on how to keep everybody safe. We had a significant pipeline leak, and there was some oil spilled on the ground. The governor just announced he's doing a task force on pipeline safety because of all the new pipelines going in, and that so that our residents can be assured that it's going to be done right. And we're learning as we go, but the industry's really been terrific about forming task force and trying to resolve the issues so that we can balance both issues. This is what a typical frac site might look like if you were to be in North Dakota and stand on the scoria dirt. This is a high-pressure zone, and I love that sign, "Do not operate this valve." I mean, there's millions of pounds of pressure going down there, and I mean, it's sand and water. The sand that they send down there is either beach sand from Wisconsin, or it could be ceramic beads that have been processed in China and shipped by rail and carried by truck to this site. So it's a very resource-intensive play. The water doesn't have to be potable, but it can't have little germies in it. So potable has worked, and now some companies are doing some recycling, and I think that's going to make we get our water now from the Missouri River, and the recycling should help us work through that. This is the grant that we were given by the HUD office. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development grant was for $1.5 million that we received. $300,000 came from our state, from our Energy Impact office. We have an Energy Impact Fund that's set aside off the oil and gas tax revenues. And $600,000 came in-kind match from our communities and our planner. We have a planner from Idaho, from Building Communities, and then the Strom Center at Dickinson State University. The total project now is running about $2.4 million. We went into it with another group, and the North Dakota Department of Commerce, which is kind of our business center, they also contributed some money to this project as well. It's a 3-year project, and it ends in January 2015. All counties located in these boundaries are included in it, and what they wanted us to do was to get some grassroots planning on the ground before things got away from it. And the interesting thing is the oil is happening primarily right here, and the political power in North Dakota is primarily right here. So when we start talking about distributing oil and gas tax revenues, it's always, they get some, we get some. And you got to make sure everybody gets what they think they need to get. So these are the 5 initiatives that were original to the grant. We said we would do strategic plans, infrastructure assessments, planning and zoning, project schematics, and webinars and regional plans, one regional plan. And we have actually used MindMixer as one of our engagement tools, and I see you have a speaker here talking about MindMixer. We're trying to use some social media. The strategic plans, when they're developed, it's just a group of local officials interested in organized planning, and they come together. It can be a county commissioner. We don't have parishes here, we have counties. We could have a county commissioner, we could have city officials. They come together and they talk about what do we like, what's going on here, and what don't we like. One of the things that happened at our very first meeting was Watford City, which is in the epicenter of this development, and they said, a couple of the women who were there said, you know what, I really don't like the fact that it's so trashy. We've always been such a clean community, and all these newcomers, they're throwing, some of the truckers were throwing bottles of urine out their truck door, and it was trashy, and we weren't used to the trash. So that got out that Watford City, one of their initiatives was, let's clean this place up. It just doesn't look good. So next thing you know, the oil and gas industry decided, you know what, we'll help you. And they organized hundreds of workers, and they picked up thousands and thousands of, gallons of trash or whatever off the ditches. And it's made a difference because now the oil and gas industry knows that it isn't, if they see someone, doing that kind of thing, that the communities are not in favor of that. And so there is some policing that's going on with that. And so just talking about things seems to get the ball rolling. This is the group that works together. We have 19 counties. The 3 affiliated tribes will be receiving about $160 million in oil tax revenue. And we'll see what they do with their money. They're still learning the process. And we also have our colleges are engaged, our universities are engaged, and they've helped us quite a bit with some research. We have 23 planning sessions completed, and when that's completed, we'll have input from over 1,000 community leaders. It's taken a lot of meetings, and I don't think if you didn't pay people to go do this, it just isn't going to happen. It's not something a volunteer can take on. And then if you look at the economic strategies across the region in western North Dakota, infrastructure development obviously is a big one. That's generally water, sewer, and roads. If you're going to build some, you have all this, we're going to get between 100 and 200,000 more people moving to North Dakota. We've always been around 800,000 people, 700,000 people, and we're hoping to get to 1 million people. And with this infrastructure development, obviously you need water and you need a road, and then you can put a house there. So obviously infrastructure has been huge. In the state, as a legislator, I can tell you we have put a lot of money into infrastructure. We put in over $1 billion into roads and water and sewer projects as in anticipation that this is something that is going to help us retain this workforce. We also have business retention, expansion, and attract government funding as some of the top 3. You can look at the list there. Quality of life is also a concern. It's come out in many of the communities that they need more public safety. We need more housing, both affordable and just more housing, and then child care programs. Our daycare providers' population was going down at a time when we needed it to actually be going up. So we had to do something about it at the state level. We've got some money put in to support daycare education and to help them get started in their business, and that will help our workforce as well. We also, on the housing side, we have a housing incentive fund. We have a housing finance agency. The state has set aside, I believe it's $35 million. The oil companies can take their $1 million they owe in taxes and they can dedicate it to a certain city. Let's say, for example, Marathon Oil, they operate out of my city, Dickinson, and they can say, well, if we owe $1 million in taxes, we want that to go to affordable housing in Dickinson. So then the state takes that money and looks for developers. Those developers can be nonprofit or they can be private developers. Basically, the state buys down the cost of the rent, can be a mixed rent in an apartment building. The state allows that, if a nonprofit group like Lutheran Social Services, I don't know if you have that active here, but their mission in North Dakota is to help provide things for communities, and so they are a nonprofit, but then we've had private developers who have redone apartment buildings, and the state goes in and buys, and of course cost of land is very high right now because of the oil boom, and they go down and they'll buy down or help. They only require that so many of the apartments are low rent, $400, $450, $500 a month, and then you can have medium-sized rents also, maybe 2 or 3 units medium level rent, and then you can have market rent for the oil field, and they'll be paying $2,500 a month. So that's just one way the state's trying to step in. We have lost long-term residents. It's no question about it, because what happens is your house you might have paid $60,000 for your house 15 years ago, and today it's worth $250,000. You're at retirement age, your kids are in Minneapolis, or your kids are in Phoenix, and you just sell the house, take the money, and relocate yourself. So we have lost some long-term residents just because of the value of their property has gone up, and they wanted to be closer to other family. So it happens, and some of that you can't, from a government perspective, I'm not sure you can really do anything about, but we have lost people who couldn't afford to stay in their apartments. New developers come in and buy an old apartment and basically give everybody their notice. So that's happened too. Quality of life. This is where the 26 completed infrastructure assessments have been done, and we have an oil impact fund, as I mentioned earlier. That's about $219 million. That comes off our oil tax. It's set aside. The governor really likes that fund because he comes out and he's able to, make press releases and say that he gave this money. Quite honestly, I work with the oil and gas counties, cities, and schools. They would rather have it formula-driven, have the oil tax just come back so they know how much money are we going to get so they can plan, which is what you do here. So it's really difficult to plan when you're always asking for money from the state in the grant. But last session, the governor had, actually he had doubled how much we got back on the formula. There's a kind of a complicated formula that's shared between the state and the county. And then he had he had doubled the impact fund as well. So we would prefer to put more into the formula, and we're still having that discussion with the governor's office today, by the way. Also, too, we put $160 million into Western County roads and bypasses. The bypasses have been really critical because, as you saw from the slide earlier that was shown with all the traffic, that actually goes right through the downtown area, and it's very disruptive. People sometimes can't even cross the street because there's just so much traffic. There's never a break in traffic. Hard to imagine, but you have that volume of people in one small location. They're very disruptive. So Watford City is getting a bypass. I don't know if the timeline is in a year and a half. I'm not sure when they'll finish it. Dickinson also is going to have a bypass. There's going to be a bypass around Williston, Alexander. There's some cities that need to have bypasses. Also, too, with this rapid growth, my city is putting in a $40 million water treatment facility that will handle the additional sewage. Our city is going to go, we were a city 18,000 people, we went to 26,000, and in 2020 we'll be at 44,000, and then we'll drop to a sustainable population of 41,000 people. Right now we have 27,000 people in crew camps. These crew camps are self-contained mostly. They handle their own water and sewer, and they had to come in. We needed more workers, and we just did not have enough housing and those kinds of things. The city of Dickinson, though, I heard something earlier about let's not do this long sprawl, and our city actually has some choke points put in, and it's right now they're choking it down, and they're saying to developers who want to go farther out and make our city kind of skinny, they're saying, no, we've got a lot of empty spots here in the middle, and we will not approve anything until this other stuff gets filled in. And boy, I tell you what, the developers have been taking them to task at the city commission meeting for that. So this is just a little bit about the water and the wastewater, and we have that new refinery that's going 4 miles west of Dickinson. They're going to take our gray water and recycle it inside their refinery. They're going to actually pay the city, which will help cut down the cost of this new water treatment facility. And then also we're, or a wastewater treatment facility, I should say, not water. And then we also received some state grants for it as well. And so the city isn't going to have to pay for all of it, and that's, as a taxpayer there, I don't really feel like my taxes should go up to support this boom at all, and I hope that doesn't happen in any of the locations across the country. One of the things that's really helped us is we've had some training sessions, planning and zoning. Our planning and zoning boards hadn't met for years, and when they did meet, they just had coffee and cookies, and they didn't have any kind of, we've long since let our planners go because we had an 80s boom when we had planners, and then we had regional planning councils, but then after that we just took a nosedive, so we haven't had any planners on staff, and our zoning people were not ready for the just barrage of developers who had all kinds of ideas and things like that. So the training sessions have been very good. We've had very good response with the county officials on that, and also the toughest one is the enforcement. When the guy, your neighbor, took his land and did something he knew he shouldn't do, and then you got to go in and deal with it and say, you're not supposed to be doing that, and he's already made his investment. And these, our zoning officials we're a small community and everybody knows everybody. It's really hard. We've had 2 crew camp seminars, which really helped because the public, there were starting to be some editorials about crew camps and how scary they are. And we need them. We need crew camps in North Dakota. We don't have the ability to house that workforce. You may not have that problem, but we certainly did. We took a video of the crew camp presentation. We had 5 good operators come in and explain. And when they put a crew camp in, they can actually remove the whole thing and it goes back to pasture. But when they put it in, they put a fence around it, they have a security guard, there's no guns, there's no alcohol, no drugs, they have a drug dog, and if someone is caught with something, they just take their stuff and put them outside the gate, and the guy's fired. So none of those guys are a problem. We haven't had any problem except at one crew camp where there was a murder. And that county decided then that they were going to review everybody's permits. So it's a 1-year special use conditional permit that the counties have given these crew camps, so they can revoke it at the end of the year. It's a 1-year review. And I don't know what they're going to do, because obviously millions of dollars is invested into these crew camps, but the county at least has some control if it gets out of hand. We've also had a lot of farmers renting space in tree rows, and that's the worst. And it's just RVs. We have 30 below weather sometimes. You have guys, and if there's an emergency, the emergency crew there's no address on any of these RVs, and it's just a mess. But the McKenzie County, the #1 county, did not have zoning. And so they had to put some zoning in place. But before they put the zoning in place, a lot of things happened. So that was a tough one. And also we've had to put in more Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI agents. We've had to put in some more state lawmen and also another FBI agent up in Williston. We've had more incidents of drugs and prostitution, which obviously it follows the money, and people have been coming from all over the world, really, in the country, to get involved with this activity. We also did some schematics, which I won't go through. It's just some posters that are done to give a vision. And let me see here. And we have a regional plan that's due. And we're using the regional plan actually to help us as we go to the legislature. It keeps it focused on the things that are really the most important for that region, and it's all grassroots driven. The one thing I'd recommend that you look at as you go forward, we're looking at getting a state demographer so we can always have good permanent population projections. And a lot of our water and sewer projects are based on what they say, on how many are coming and how many will stay. And not everybody's going to stay. We also have a legacy fund that the voters put in, and that is 30% off the top of the oil and gas tax. It's put into a permanent fund, and we can take some of the money out in 2017. We're hoping to maybe do something like Wyoming did and fund college scholarships for needy and merit-based as well. We also did a Western Area Water Supply up by Williston, which is a huge $350 million water supply, rural water supply, and we are asking the oil industry to pay for it. The oil industry buys water, and so we had private water sellers already out in the market, but we stepped in and said we will take a small share of that as well, and that is paying for that water system. We would never been able to do this water system to a very remote rural area from that McKenzie County all the way north and then east a bit. It's a huge area that will be connected to good Missouri River water coming out of the Williston Treatment Center, Williston Water Treatment Center. And also Continental Resources has a direct pipe. There's Oasis does. There's another company that does as well. We also sell a direct pipe connection for water to the industry, and they're paying for that. Our EMS services are stressed. If you have a volunteer emergency ambulance service, that gets stressed right away because instead of one or two calls, they're going all the time. They can't work anymore. So we've had to go, and it's a little touchy because they're a little parochial in our area because they have always been volunteers and nobody's been paid. And so for the state to step in, we've really got to work with the locals about, is it okay if somebody comes in and they're paid and they cover so you don't have to be gone so much? So far, I think we're going to be able to get that to work out, but I wouldn't jump into it right away until you've talked to the locals who have been doing this for a long time on a volunteer status, because they're very proud of at least in North Dakota, they're very proud of the ambulance services they provide. And then also the really tough one is the crowding out. The oil and gas guys have a lot of money, and so when they go to buy a house or they rent an apartment, it ends up crowding out some others in our community. So we're always vigilant on that, and then these are some of the regional issues that we'll be going through. We do a lot of public education, and that's been helpful, I think, when people look at other areas. We've done some webinars. This is about the Mind Mixer, and then where do we go from there? The regional plan is going to have specific recommendations that will help us work through this rapid growth. And these are the players. And in fact, Mr. Rick Garcia is actually in Dickinson today. And I had a state guy call me and say, how come you're going to be in Louisiana? And I said, well, my apologies, but nobody told me about it, actually. So hopefully I can visit with him tomorrow. He's actually in Dickinson, or he's in the West 2 days. He flies out of Dickinson tomorrow, so I'm hoping to see him tomorrow. And then this is our federal partners, and we have federal partners, state partners, and this is our contact from our administrative team on the Vision West. But again, I would encourage you to look at your population studies and look to your universities for their research as you work through this, if you get to see a boom, and engage the industry. The industry always has some good answers for us, and we've done really well working together, I think, as a team with them as best we can. So between that, I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to be here and get out of the cold weather for a day. Thank you.
Well, I think you'll agree that was great presentations by the panel. We're a little over, but Boo tells me we can take maybe 2 questions before we break. Do we have any questions? I can't see. So. Oh, please.
To the board for the LED, so what is the estimated number of permanent jobs with manufacturers?
Well, I could give you some sort of ballparks, but honestly, we're still working on finalizing some of that, and I only had some of the projects listed. So if you don't mind finding me afterwards, I would be glad to follow up with you once we have an actual number. And once we do, that certainly will be public, but it's not finalized at this point.
Do we have a final question? If not, I'm sure you can catch any of us on the way out. If not, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.